Bumpy Johnson already knew something was wrong long before that morning arrived. The pressure in his chest hadn't been subtle anymore. It came heavy, stubborn, like a warning that refused to be ignored. July 6, 1968. He woke up that day with the quiet understanding that this might be the last sunrise he'd ever see. No panic, no fear, just acceptance. Still, he got out of bed. He dressed the same way he always did, slow, precise, deliberate. A man who had survived bullets, prisons, betrayals, and entire crime families wasn't about to rush now. The message had already reached him. The Genovese family wanted to talk. A sit-down. One last conversation about Harlem, about heroin, about what happens when a crown starts slipping. He could have stayed home, could have sat by the window, let the day pass peacefully, maybe even listened to the street sounds one last time. But that wasn't Bumpy Johnson. Men like him didn't hide when the end came. They showed up. So he walked into Wells' restaurant like he had 1,000 times before. Same booth, same side, always facing the door. Across the table would soon sit men who believed time had finally caught up with him. Men who thought age and sickness had softened Harlem's most unmovable wall. What Bumpy understood, what they didn't, was that he stood at a crossroads where only one thing could be saved: his own life, or Harlem's future. There was no version of this story where he kept both. Summer in Harlem, 1968, carried a strange weight. You could feel it in the air if you knew how to listen. It wasn't the buildings falling apart. It wasn't the people. The music still played. The street still breathed. But something underneath it all was cracking, like a foundation quietly giving way. Heroin was seeping in, slow, patient, poisonous. Everybody knew who was pushing it. The Italian mob, the Genovese crew. And for 30 years, Bumpy Johnson had been the reason that poison never fully took hold. He controlled the numbers, balanced the gangs. Smooth tensions between Irish crews, Italian families, and black street organizations. But there was one rule that never bent, never negotiated. No heroin in Harlem, not on his watch. But by 1968, Bumpy wasn't the man he once was physically. He was 62. His heart betrayed him more often than enemies ever did. Doctors at Harlem Hospital had warned him months earlier. Slow down, step away, enjoy what's left. Retirement wasn't an option. Men like Bumpy didn't disappear quietly. They went out standing tall or not at all. The Genovese family knew he was weakening. They watched closely. Vito Genovese himself sat locked up in Atlanta, struggling with his own failing heart. But his crew was still hungry, still dangerous, still dreaming. And to them, Harlem without Bumpy Johnson looked like an open vault. The younger soldiers saw it as inevitable. They didn't know the old stories. Didn't know about 1935, when Bumpy walked unarmed into Lucky Luciano's office and walked out alive. They figured death would do the work for them. Let the old man fade, then move in. Heroin pipelines, gambling control. Harlem reduced to numbers on a ledger. The older bosses weren't so confident, they remembered. They knew Harlem wasn't free just because Bumpy was sick. As long as he breathed, nothing here was uncontested. So instead of force, they chose diplomacy, a meeting, a deal. Something wrapped in respect and money. Maybe he'd want one last payday. Maybe he'd want to secure his family. Maybe he'd step aside gracefully. So that morning, a black Cadillac rolled out of Little Italy and headed north. Inside sat 3 men carrying power, pressure, and intent. Tony Peel's Lentini, smooth-talking, experienced. Joey surprised Stacy, quiet, watchful, gripping a leather briefcase filled with cash. And Paulie Fortunato, young, eager, pretending he wasn't out of his depth. What they didn't understand was simple. They weren't walking into a meeting. They were walking into history. Wells' restaurant sat at 132nd and 7th. Nothing fancy. Red booths worn thin by decades, checkered floors, bacon grease and old coffee hanging in the air. A place where time slowed down, where legends sat without needing introductions. Photographs lined the walls. Duke Ellington, Billie Holiday, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., and tucked away quietly, a framed image of Bumpy Johnson shaking hands with Muhammad Ali. That booth belonged to him. That morning he sat alone. Mame had begged him not to go. Said she felt something heavy in her chest, the kind of instinct wives of dangerous men develop. Bumpy kissed her forehead, straightened his tie, and promised he'd be home for lunch. He always wore a suit. even for breakfast. Respect, he believed, started with presentation, scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, wheat toast, black coffee. Routine mattered. He opened the Amsterdam News, eyes settling on an article about the garbage strike just as the door opened. The room changed instantly. Not chaos, not panic, just silence, the kind that crawls in slowly and takes the air with it. Dorothy, the waitress, froze mid-pour. Coffee spilled onto the counter. Everyone in Harlem knew what Italian suits and quiet faces meant. Business. Bumpy didn't look up. He sipped his coffee and turned the page. Tony Lentini approached first, confident, polite. Joey stayed back, guarding the briefcase. Polly hovered behind them, trying to look calm. "Mr. Johnson," Tony said carefully, "mind if we sit?" Bumpy folded the newspaper with no rush. His eyes lifted, cold, steady, unblinking, eyes that had stared down killers and kings alike. He nodded. "Free country." They slid into the booth. Dorothy offered coffee. Tony waved her away. This wasn't breakfast. Across the diner, every ear listened without looking. Outside, two of Bumpy's men waited in a parked Buick. Jack Turner, Slim Washington, watching, ready. Tony nodded to Joey. The briefcase hit the table beside Bumpy's coffee. The latches snapped open. Bundles of cash sat neatly inside, heavy and undeniable. Tony leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Mr. Johnson, we've come with respect. And an offer." Bumpy didn't touch the money. The tone he used wasn't aggressive. It was worse than that. It was the kind of voice a man uses when something smells off. "But the numbers are too good to ignore." "Mr. Johnson," Tony said carefully, choosing each word like it might explode. "We're here with respect. And with an offer that, frankly, most men wouldn't walk away from." Bumpy didn't move. He didn't look at the open case, didn't acknowledge the money sitting inches from his coffee cup. His gaze stayed locked on Tony's face, unblinking, unreadable. "I'm hearing you," Bumpy said quietly. Tony leaned forward just a little, palms flat on the table, deliberately keeping his hands far from the cash, a silent signal of trust. "The world's changing, Mr. Johnson. You've seen it before anyone else. The numbers game, the slips, the old hustles, they don't excite the younger crowd anymore. These kids grew up different. They want something that makes them forget where they're from, forget the war, the hunger, the bad memories." He paused, then said the word plainly. "Heroin?" Bumpy didn't flinch, didn't blink. He lifted his cup, took another slow sip of coffee, his grip steady, almost gentle. Tony gestured toward the briefcase. "Like it or not, it's already moving. Demand's there. The supplies locked in. We've got channels through Marseille, Turkey, Southeast Asia. It's coming into New York whether you approve or not." He let the silence stretch, watching Bumpy's face for any crack. There wasn't one. "The only real question," Tony continued, nodding toward the cash, "is who controls it." Then, softer now, more personal, "That's 100,000. Clean. No obligations. Just a handshake. And that's only the beginning. We're offering you 30% of everything Harlem generates. You don't sell it, you don't touch it, you don't dirty your hands. You just don't interfere, you keep your streets, we keep ours. Everybody walks away rich." The briefcase sat open like temptation, made solid stacks of hundreds. Tight bands, heavy money. The kind that paid hospital bills, bought buildings, secured bloodlines. The kind of money that rewrote endings. Most men would have stared. Most men would have calculated. But Bumpy Johnson wasn't most men. Polly, the youngest one, couldn't stay quiet anymore. Youth had a way of pushing words out before wisdom could catch them. "Mr. Johnson," he said, trying to sound respectful, failing just enough to be dangerous. "You've had a legendary run. 30 years on top. Nobody's disputing that. But why keep fighting now? Take the deal. Enjoy what time you've got left. Be with your family. This thing's happening either way. We're just giving you the courtesy of first refusal." That's when Bumpy's eyes moved, slowly, deliberately, from Tony to Polly. The booth seemed to shrink. 3 tables away, Dorothy stopped pouring water. Her hand froze mid-air. Somewhere behind the counter, a fork clattered against a plate. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Tony reached out instinctively, a hand halfway toward Polly, too late. "How old are you, son?" Bumpy asked. His tone was casual, almost friendly. Polly straightened, trying to look steady. 25. 25, Bumpy repeated, rolling the number around like he was testing its weight. He nodded to himself. You know how old I was when I walked into Lucky Luciano's office without a gun and told him Harlem wasn't for sale. Paulie didn't answer. He couldn't. He didn't know. 29, Bumpy said. 4 years older than you. He leaned in just enough for the words to land heavier. You know what Lucky told me? A pause. He said I was crazy. Said I was already dead. Said his whole outfit would crush me like I didn't matter. Another pause. Longer this time. That was 1935, 33 years ago. Bumpy glanced around the booth, his expression calm, almost amused. And here I am, still breathing, still sitting in Harlem. His eyes shifted back to Tony. And Lucky, a thin smile. He died in exile, Italy. 1962, heart gave out. Bumpy's fingers tapped lightly against the table. Same way mine's trying to. He looked directly at Tony now. Where's Vito Genovese these days? Tony shifted in his seat, just a fraction. Federal lockup, he said. Atlanta, heart trouble. Bumpy nodded slowly. Funny, isn't it? We spent decades trying to kill each other, and in the end, it's our own hearts that finish the job. Tony tried to regain control. Mr. Johnson, no one here is trying to disrespect you. We know your legacy. But times change. Codes fade. Rules don't survive forever. Bumpy's voice stayed calm, but there was steel underneath it now. You think you're showing me something new? You think this pitch hasn't crossed my table before? He leaned back. Heroin isn't new, Tony. It's been knocking on Harlem's door since the 20s. After the First War. After the Second. Every time it came calling, Tony stayed silent. And every time Bumpy continued, I slammed the door. He didn't wait for permission to finish. I watched what it did to Chinatown. I saw Chicago rot from the inside. I watched men with futures turn into ghosts, and I promised myself, as long as I was standing, that poison wouldn't run through Harlem. Then slowly, deliberately, Bumpy reached forward. He closed the briefcase. The latches snapped shut, sharp, final. He pushed it across the table. The scraping sound cut through the diner like a warning shot. I don't want your money, Bumpy said quietly. And I don't want your product on these streets. Joey finally spoke, his voice colder, harder. Be realistic, Bumpy. You can't stop this. You're one man. We're an organization. We've got politicians, judges, muscle. What do you have left? Bumpy looked at Joey, then Tony, then Paulie, and then he smiled. Not warm, not friendly. It was the smile of a man who wasn't afraid anymore. Let me explain something about this place, Bumpy said, his voice steady even as pressure tightened in his chest. You think Harlem is just territory, just another square on your board. He shook his head slowly. You're wrong. He shook his head slowly. Harlem isn't territory, Bumpy said. It's a promise. His voice stayed steady, but every word carried weight. A promise to the men and women who built this place with empty hands. To the ones who came north from the south carrying nothing but hope in their pockets. It's a promise to the kids on these streets that life can be more than hustling corners or pushing poison. He tapped a closed briefcase once with his knuckle. You bring that here, he continued, and you're not selling a product. You're selling ruin. You're turning children into bodies. You're trading tomorrow for cash today. That's not business, a pause. That's death, Tony shifted in his seat. Mr. Johnson, we're businessmen. We can't control what people choose to do. Don't, Bumpy said. His voice was still low, but now it carried force, the kind that presses down on a room. Someone dropped a spoon behind the counter. The sound rang out sharp like a gunshot in the silence. Don't hide behind words like choice, Bumpy continued. You're not selling bread, you're not building anything, you're ending things. Families, futures, whole communities. And you want my blessing? The pressure in his chest surged harder now. His left arm felt heavy, numb. He knew exactly what this was. He'd seen it before, watched his own father die like this in a field back in South Carolina. Still, he wasn't finished. He looked at all three men. This is my answer. His eyes went first to Tony, then to Joey, then to Paulie, who couldn't hold the stare and look down. You bring that poison into Harlem, Bumpy said. You'll do it over my dead body. And even after that, the people I trained, the ones who carry what I believe, they won't stop. You won't own this place. Not like you own the Bronx. Not like Little Italy. Not while even one person remembers what I stood for. The pain sharpened. His breath grew tight and shallow. But there was one last thing Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson needed to leave behind. 7 words. He leaned forward, locked eyes with Tony Peels, and said quietly, "Harlem doesn't bow." Then softer but no less firm, "Not now, not ever." The pain hit him like a hammer. His hand clawed at his chest. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers and shattered against the checkered floor. Black liquid spread across the tiles like spilled ink. Dorothy screamed, "Somebody call an ambulance." Before anyone could move, the front door burst open. 4 men rushed in, Harlem men. Big Jack Turner led them, 6'4" and built like a wall. Slim Washington followed. Then Marcus, the Deacon, Williams, and Cleveland, young, sharp-eyed, loyal. They'd been watching from across the street the entire time. Big Jack took in the scene in seconds, Bumpy gasping, his hand at his chest, 3 Italian suits across from him, a black briefcase on the table. His voice turned cold. "What did you do to him?" Tony's face drained of color. His hands came up instinctively. "Nothing. We were just talking." He grabbed his chest. "Just like that, I swear." "You brought poison to his table," Big Jack said, stepping forward, each step heavy. "You disrespected him in his own house, and now he's dying in front of you." That's when it hit them. It didn't matter what was true. It mattered what it looked like. 3 Italian mobsters sitting with Bumpy Johnson when he collapsed in the middle of Harlem, surrounded by witnesses who loved him like family. This wasn't business anymore. This was survival. Joey edged toward the door, eyes wide, still clutching the briefcase. Paulie's hand drifted toward his jacket, but Big Jack caught his wrist in a grip like steel. "You reach for that gun," Big Jack said quietly, "and you won't leave Harlem breathing." Through the pain, Bumpy forced air into his lungs. "Let them go." Big Jack looked down. "Boss?" "Let them go," Bumpy repeated. Every word cost him. He turned his fading eyes to Tony. "Tell your people what I said." His voice was weak now, but the message wasn't. Harlem doesn't bow. Big Jack held Paulie 1 second longer, then released him. The look he gave them promised consequences if they ever returned. Tony grabbed the briefcase. Too dangerous to leave behind, too connected to this moment. They didn't walk out. They ran. Tires screamed as the Cadillac tore away from Harlem. They weren't running from Bumpy anymore. They were running from what Harlem would become if he died. Inside Wells, Dorothy knelt beside him, holding his hand, tears falling freely. Big Jack shouted for Harlem Hospital. People gathered, crying, praying, stunned. Bumpy looked up at Dorothy and smiled. A real smile. "Tell Mame," he whispered. "I'm sorry I missed lunch." Those were his last words. At 8:52 a.m., July 7th, 1968, Bumpy Johnson's heart stopped. 5 minutes after refusing $100,000. 5 minutes after choosing principle over comfort. 5 minutes after reminding the world where he stood. He died in his booth at Wells, the same place he'd eaten breakfast for 20 years. He died in Harlem, unbought, unbowed. 5 days later, more than 5,000 people filled Abyssinian Baptist Church. The line stretched 6 blocks down 7th Avenue. People came who knew him, people who only knew the stories, and the mob, they tried again. For 6 months, heroin crept into Harlem, slow, patient, brutal. They thought the king was gone and the city was unguarded. They were wrong, the old guard remembered. The runners, the organizers, the ones who knew the line between hustle and harm. But time is undefeated. In the years that followed, a new generation rose, one that didn't know Bumpy, didn't sit at his table, didn't learn his code, and eventually the poison got in. Harlem paid the price. Still, the Italians never truly owned it because memory matters, and in barbershops, on stoops, in quiet conversations, his name never left. A man who said no, a man who couldn't be bought. Hey, a man who chose honor over life. That was his legacy. Not money, not territory. But that moment at Wells, when he stood firm as his heart failed. On July 7, 1968, Bumpy Johnson's heart stopped beating. But his words didn't. Harlem doesn't bow.